There is a particular kind of glass case, and I think you already know the one I mean. Bright light coming up from underneath. A row of rings on little grey pillows. Behind the counter, a man who is perfectly pleasant, and behind him a wall of guitars and somebody's saxophone. A pawn shop. And a great many people in this country walk past that window their whole lives without once going in. So let me tell you what is actually in that case. A pawn shop is not really a jewellery store. It is a lender. It puts money out against objects, and when an object does not come home again, it has to turn back into money quickly. So the shop prices the one part of a piece it can be certain about in under a minute. The metal, the weight, the stamp inside the band. Everything else is a slower question. Who made it? What country it came from? Whether it was cut by hand or poured into a mould? Whether the stone grew in the ground or in a machine? Those take a loupe and 20 quiet minutes, and there is not one person in that building paid for 20 quiet minutes. 10 things in a pawn shop case genuinely worth stopping for, and 5 they nearly always ask far too much for. And at number 1, a body of American silver that is literally named after pawn shops, and that most of this country has forgotten how to read. Your kit is small, a 10-power loupe, which costs less than a sandwich. Your telephone, because the camera magnifies better than people realise. A notebook. And hear me once. Nothing here asks you to scratch, burn, or dissolve anything. Please do not carry an acid kit into a shop. Everything I show you is looking, reading, and asking. Number 10. The chest of sterling flatware that never made it into the window, usually on a shelf at the back. A wooden canteen lined in dark blue felt, full of forks somebody's mother got as a wedding present in 1951. What the counter sees is silver by the ounce, weighed against the day's metal price. What it also is a pattern. And patterns have names with a market entirely separate from the metal. Gorham's Chantilly, Reed and Barton's Francis I, Towell's Old Master, Wallace's Grande Baroque. American patterns in continuous demand for the better part of a century, because families break things and daughters inherit incomplete sets. And here is what almost nobody knows. The premium does not live in the teaspoons. It lives in the odd serving pieces. The pie server, the cold meat fork, the tomato server, the bonbon spoon, the ladle. Bought in ones and twos, lost first, hunted for now. A single serving piece in a live pattern has been known to bring more than a dozen teaspoons of the very same silver. Your check is the back of the handle, held under the light at an angle rather than straight on. You want the words sterling and a maker's mark. Gorham used a lion, an anchor, and the letter G. The pattern name is often stamped right beside it, and the warning that costs people money. Candlesticks and many knife handles are what the trade calls weighted or reinforced. The silver is a thin shell filled with cement to give it heft, and the mark usually says so. That filling is not silver. And why does nobody mention the serving pieces? Because there is no display case in America for a single cold meat fork. A category with no shelf gets no shelf price. Number 9. The tray of single earrings. Every shop open more than a year has one. A dish of odd earrings, no mates, $1 or 2 each, or grouped as scrap. They pile up because people lose one and sell the survivor, and because, as an earring, one is half of something. But look at what it actually is. If it is solid gold, it is solid gold. Gold has never once cared whether it has a twin. If it is signed, the signature is still there, and the marks hide in 2 places people never check. On a pierced earring, read the post itself, right up near the back. On a clip or a screwback, read the flat plate of the fitting rather than the front. There is also a use for an orphan the counter has no reason to mention. A jeweller can turn a single earring into a pendant in about an hour, and it is one of the cheapest jobs on the bench. A lovely screw back from the 1920s, hanging on a chain, is a piece of jewellery again. The shop cannot sell you that idea because the shop does not do the work. Number 8. The gold chain and the 3 separate things stamped on it. There are 3 marks on a chain, not 1, and they do not have to agree. The carat mark, which may be 10K or 14K, or the numbers 375, 585, 750. A maker's mark, which on Italian chain is a small number inside a shaped outline beside the word Italy, because Italian law requires a registered maker's number. And the mark on the clasp. The clasp is where people get caught. A clasp is a separate manufactured part, soldered on. and it can be a completely different metal from the chain it hangs off. A genuine 14-carat clasp on a plated chain exists in this world, and so does the reverse. Read both. Photograph both. Then, solid or hollow, which moves the number more than anything. From roughly the 1980s onward, an enormous amount of chain was made hollow. Tube-built, sold on the appearance of size rather than the weight of it. You can see it without touching anything. Look at the last link where it meets the clasp, under the loupe, for a fine seam running along the tube. And watch how it hangs. A solid chain has a reluctant weight to it. A hollow one moves like ribbon. Number 7. The little paper envelope of loose stones. Ask whether they have any loose stones, and in a great many shops, somebody goes into the back and returns with a drawer of folded paper packets. Stones that came out of broken mountings and never found a home. They sit because they are awkward. Nothing to photograph, nothing to try on, no story. A ring sells itself. A stone in a paper packet sells to almost nobody. And here is what the trade knows and the public does not. The value in that drawer is very often not the biggest stone. It is the small, calibrated ones. Baguettes cut to a precise size, little squares, tapered side stones, French cuts with those distinctive corners. Because an entire restoration trade needs exactly those and cannot buy them new. When a 1920s ring arrives at a workshop with 2 baguettes missing, somebody must find 2 of the right length, width, colour and cut, and modern cutting does not match old proportions. A bench jeweller who spots a good packet of period side stones will buy the packet. Now the honest part. A loose stone with no paperwork is a guess. Colour and sparkle prove nothing. Cubic zirconia, white sapphire, moissanite and a great deal of plain glass live in those drawers alongside the real thing, and no home observation settles it. Buy at a price you would be content with if the whole packet turned out to be nothing. Number 6. Diamond studs, and the 2 words that change everything. Studs cross a pawn counter more often than almost any other stone piece in America. No brand, almost no metal, no design. 2 stones and 2 posts, which is exactly why they are often good buying. The counter cannot charge you for a name that is not there, but here are the 2 words, and they are on nearly every tag. Total weight. 1 carat total weight means 2 stones of about half a carat each. And here is what nobody explains. Diamond pricing does not run in a straight line. Per carat, a single stone of a full carat has generally commanded a substantially higher rate than 2 stones of half a carat because larger rough is scarcer. 1 carat total weight and 1 carat in a single stone are 2 entirely different objects wearing similar language. That is not a trick and it is not illegal. It is ordinary trade wording. But read it as 1 carat and you will overpay, and I have watched sensible people do exactly that. Then check the matching, because studs live or die on it. Ask to see them out of the box, side by side, same light, on white paper. 2 stones of visibly different warmth, or one plainly livelier than the other, is a pair somebody assembled rather than a pair somebody bought. Number 5. Gold with a mark on it that is not American. American gold is marked in carats. Most of the rest of the world marks gold in parts per thousand, and once you know 6 numbers, you can read all of it. 375 is 9 carat. 585 is 14, 750 is 18, 916, sometimes 917, is 22 carat, 875 is 21 carat, which turns up constantly on gold from the Middle East, and 999 is very nearly pure. Now think what that means standing at a counter. A heavy bangle marked 916 is 22 carat gold. It holds far more gold per gram than the 14 carat chain beside it. And to somebody who has only ever read carat marks, 916 looks like a serial number. There are country marks worth knowing too, and they are pictures rather than words. France used an eagle's head for 18 carat gold. Russian and Soviet-era gold carries a small profile of a woman's head in a traditional headdress alongside 583 or 585. And British gold and silver carry a full set of hallmarks, including a date letter, which means a British piece will frequently tell you the exact year it was assayed. Not the decade, the year. So photograph any mark you cannot read, zoomed right in, with the light raking across the metal rather than shining straight at it, and look it up at home in peace. And one small correction, because people repeat the old rule and it is out of date. Under the Federal Trade Commission's revised jewelry guides, there is no longer a minimum fineness required before something may be called gold in the United States. The old 10-carat floor is gone. What has not changed is that the quality must be disclosed. So a piece described simply as gold is a piece you need to read for yourself. 5 to go on the buying side, then the 5 they overprice. 2 quick things first. If this is the sort of thing you enjoy, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep going, and it costs you nothing. And the part I never skip. I am not a certified appraiser, and nothing in this video is an appraisal, an insurance valuation, or legal advice. Every value moves enormously with condition, rarity, maker, provenance, and recent sold results, so please do not treat any figure you hear anywhere, from me or from anyone else, as fixed. Before you buy, sell, or insure anything you believe is valuable, have it examined in person and check with a certified appraiser and your own state and local regulations. Some antique jewelry contains ivory, tortoiseshell, restricted coral, or protected feathers, and federal and state law limits the sale and shipment of those materials. Older costume jewelry can contain lead, cadmium, or nickel, so wash your hands after a long sorting session and keep pieces away from small children. And never test old jewelry with acid, flame, or a hot needle. Number 4. The ring with a chipped stone. Or with no stone at all. There is nearly always one. Sitting slightly apart, marked as is, because the diamond has a visible nick along the edge, or because the center is an empty hole with 4 bare prongs standing up around nothing. What the counter sees is a broken thing, and broken things are priced to be gone. What it also is, quite often, is a period mounting. And a period mounting is not a leftover, it is the object. From roughly 1910 into the 1930s, American engagement rings were built in platinum and white gold, with an ambition that is hard to describe until you have one under a loupe. Pierced galleries, hand-cut openwork, a fine beaded edge worked along every line. The whole intention of the style was to use as little metal as possible and as much labor as humanly possible. And a jeweler restoring an antique ring cannot buy those new. They are not made anymore. So here is the skill, and it applies to everything in that case. Learn to tell hand made from cast. Under your loupe, a cast piece often shows tiny round pits in the surface, like orange peel under magnification, and the detail looks slightly soft, as though it had been left out in the rain. Hand-pierced and die-struck work shows crisp, flat walls where a saw went through, sharp corners, and sometimes fine parallel file marks along an inside edge. As for the chipped stone, a chipped diamond can very often be recut. You lose weight and gain a clean stone. But get a quote before you buy rather than after, because that is specialist benchwork and the price varies enormously. And check that the prongs are not worn to whiskers and the shank has not been thinned by decades of polishing. A poor repair is harder to undo than honest damage. Number 3. The watch band that is worth more than the watch. Ladies' watches from the middle of the last century arrive at pawn counters in great numbers, usually stopped, usually with a tired strap, and always priced as one object. But a watch like that is 2 objects wearing one price tag. There is the case and movement, and there is the bracelet, and they were very often made by different companies, out of different materials, carrying separate marks. I have seen a great many where the case is gold-filled and the bracelet is solid gold, and just as many the other way around. A wide mesh or brick-link bracelet from the 1940s can hold 2 or 3 times the metal of the little watch head it carries, because the bracelet was the fashion and the watch was almost an excuse for it. So read both. The case mark is on the back, sometimes tucked under the lugs. The bracelet mark is on the underside of the clasp, or on the flat plate of the very last link, and you will want the loupe and a good angle of light. And the correction that matters. A stopped watch is not a dead watch. Mechanical watches stop because they are dirty and because the oil in them turned to varnish 30 years ago. That is a service, not a funeral. But get the estimate first, because a service on a mechanical movement is skilled labour and can easily cost more than the watch is worth. One more thing I feel strongly about. If a piece like this is bought purely for the gold, the bracelet goes into the melt and the little watch goes into a bin. That is permanent. You cannot unmelt a bracelet. So even if the answer eventually is to sell the metal, find out what you have first. Number 2. The bag behind the counter. This one is not in the case. It is in a drawer, or a small safe, or a padded envelope waiting for the post, and you have to ask for it. Every shop that buys precious metal accumulates scrap. Bent chain, single earrings, snapped clasps, thin-worn bands, mountings with the stones pulled out. weighed together, priced together, shipped to a refiner together, everything in it worth exactly one number per gram. And here is what I would most like you to understand about that bag. The refiner is the only buyer on earth who never asks a single question. Not who made it, not what country it came from, not what year it was assayed, not whether it is signed. That is precisely why the bag exists. It is the frictionless exit. So ask, politely and once, do you have any scrap I could look through before it goes out? Some shops will say no, and that is entirely their right. Some will tip it onto a tray, because a customer who buys the tray at scrap price has just saved them the postage. And be honest about it. Most of what is in that bag genuinely is scrap, and genuinely should be melted. This is not a treasure hunt. It is simply the one place in the building nobody has looked, and looking costs you nothing but the asking. Number 1. Old porn. In the Southwest, from the late 1800s well into living memory, trading posts on and around the Navajo and Zuni lands worked as banks. A family would pawn a concho belt, a squash blossom necklace, a heavy bracelet, against supplies or cash, and redeem it later. Silver was not decoration. It was the family savings, worn on the body, pawned and redeemed across generations. Pieces never redeemed became what the trade calls dead pawn, and work made in that era, for that purpose, is what people mean by old pawn. It is a phrase born in a pawn room. Alongside it, and constantly confused with it, is the railroad trade. The Fred Harvey Company ran hotels and lunchrooms along the Santa Fe line and commissioned lighter, thinner silver aimed squarely at travelers, stamped with arrows and thunderbirds, made to be affordable and to go home in a suitcase. Genuine period silver with a history of its own, and not the same thing as a piece made for a Navajo family to wear. And the difference is visible once somebody shows you. Older work was frequently made from ingot silver, poured and hammered out by hand, so the metal has a slightly uneven, living surface rather than the flat perfection of rolled sheet. The stamp work was done with dies the smith made himself, often filed out of old files and chisels, so the repeats are almost identical and not quite. And look at the back. A piece that lived on a body for 50 years wears in a particular way. High points go smooth, recesses stay dark, and the back of a bracelet that sat against a wrist is polished by skin in a pattern nobody fakes convincingly. There is real scholarship behind this, which is what makes it satisfying rather than guesswork. In 1975, the collection of C.G. Wallace, a trader who spent half a century at Zuni, was sold at auction by Sotheby Park Burnett in Phoenix, under the auspices of the Heard Museum, in a sale running to well over 1,000 lots. That catalogue is still used as a reference because it attached silversmiths' names to specific pieces at a time when the trade sold this work anonymously. And there is a woman worth knowing. Millicent Rogers was a Standard Oil heiress and a considerable figure in American fashion, and in the late 1940s she moved to Taos, New Mexico. She collected Southwestern silver seriously, and she wore it, at a moment when the fashionable world dismissed it as souvenir goods. Her collection became the Millicent Rogers Museum, which is still there. One woman deciding in public that something was beautiful moved an entire field. Now the honest flip, and I want to be direct. Old porn has become a marketing phrase. It gets stuck on listings constantly, and a great deal of what carries the label is not old and was never pawned. Paper pawn tags tied on with string prove nothing at all, because a tag costs nothing to write. Judge the object. The metal, the stamps, the wear, the construction, the stones. And a legal point, because this is one of the few corners of collecting with a federal statute attached. Under the Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1990, it is unlawful to offer or display for sale any good in a manner that falsely suggests it is Indian produced or the product of a particular tribe. So the word authentic is not decoration here, it is a legal claim, and you may ask what it rests on. If you want to go further, the Heard Museum in Phoenix and the Wheelwright Museum of the American Indian in Santa Fe both hold serious hallmark research on Southwestern silversmiths. And the invisible economics is the same as everything else on this list. A signed piece by a known Navajo or Zuni or Hopi silversmith cannot be reissued next season and cannot be patented. There is no manufacturer with a marketing budget who benefits from you learning that name. So the name sits on the back, unread, priced by the ounce. Now we turn the whole thing around, because everything above works for one reason and everything below fails for the same reason running backwards. If the shop can measure it, or if the shop can recognize it, you are paying full retail. Number 5. Colored stones priced on how they look. A shop can test gold in seconds. It cannot grade a sapphire, and that is not a criticism, because grading colored stones properly needs training, equipment, and time, so they get priced on impressiveness instead. And what I most want you to know about is composite ruby. Since the early 2000s, enormous quantities of very poor quality corundum have been filled with lead glass, which fills the fractures, transforms the apparent clarity, and adds weight. The Gemological Institute of America will not issue an ordinary ruby report on much of this material. It describes it instead as a manufactured product combining ruby and glass, and warns the binding material may be unstable to heat and to chemicals, and that special care is needed in cleaning or repair, which means a steam cleaner or an hour under a torch during a resizing can visibly damage the stone. So ask directly and do not accept a soft answer. Is this stone lead glass filled or a composite? Not treated, not enhanced. Those words cover everything from perfectly normal heating to this. And ask for the answer on the receipt. The same caution runs across that whole case. Diffusion-treated sapphire, dyed and stabilized turquoise, composite turquoise held together with resin. None of it is illegal, all of it must be disclosed, and none of it is visible from your side of the glass. Number 4. Laboratory-grown diamonds priced like mined ones. This is the newest problem in that case, and it did not exist in this form 10 years ago. In 2018, the Federal Trade Commission revised its jewelry guides and removed the word natural from the basic definition of a diamond, recognizing that a laboratory-grown stone is chemically and physically a diamond. What the Commission did not do is make the two interchangeable in a shop window. The unqualified word diamond still refers to a mined stone, and a laboratory-grown stone must be clearly and conspicuously disclosed as one. Here is where a pawn case gets complicated. Wholesale prices for laboratory-grown stones have fallen a very long way in a short time. A stone that came in as collateral several years ago may still carry a tag written against a market that has since moved underneath it. Nobody has to be dishonest for that to happen. Tags do not update themselves. So ask plainly, is this stone mined or laboratory-grown, and how do you know? Many laboratory-grown stones are laser-inscribed on the girdle with letters and a report number, which a jeweler reads under magnification in seconds, and screening instruments exist specifically for this. And let me be fair, there is nothing wrong with a laboratory-grown diamond. It is a real diamond and a beautiful thing to own. What is wrong is paying a mined price for one, and in a case where nobody has checked, that is very easy to do. Number 3. Anything priced from a piece of paper. Somebody pawns a ring and brings the appraisal that came with it. The document says 6,000. The tag says 3,000, marked as half of appraised value, and that feels like a bargain. But understand what a retail replacement appraisal is for. It establishes what it would cost to replace the item, new, at retail, so an insurer knows what to pay out. It is generous by design, and it was very often written by the person who sold the piece. Half of a number written for a different purpose is still a number written for a different purpose. And grading reports are not all equal either, which is a harder thing to say out loud. In 2014, the Rappaport Group announced that its RapNet trading network would stop listing diamonds accompanied by reports from any European Gemological Laboratories branch, citing what it described as confusion and inconsistency among those reports and the use of established grading terminology without the corresponding standards. That followed news investigations and lawsuits in Tennessee involving customers who discovered on resale that their stones graded several grades lower elsewhere. So look at whose name is on the paper. The Gemological Institute of America and the American Gem Society are the two most consistently relied upon in the American trade. And ask the question that settles a great deal. Will you let this stone be sent for regrading before the sale is final, or accept a return if it comes back materially different? Number 2. The famous name and the branded watch. These belong together because they fail for the same reason. A counter recognizes a famous name instantly, and the instant it does, it prices to the name rather than to the object. Watches are the sharpest version, because watch values are public and easy to look up. A shop checks the going rate in about a minute, and it does, so the discount you hoped for is mostly not there. And those risks are real. Counterfeits at the upper end are extremely sophisticated. Service history is usually unknown, and a service on a fine mechanical watch is not a small bill. Replacement parts, an aftermarket dial, a swapped bezel, and above all, diamonds set into a factory case by somebody other than the manufacturer, all affect value enormously. And that last one generally subtracts from what a collector will pay rather than adding to it. And number one on the overpriced side, the piece the shop has already polished. Walk the case slowly and you will spot them. The silver buffed to a mirror, the old ring whose prongs are suspiciously bright. The tarnished things are in the back tray, and the shiny ones are under the good light with the higher tags, because shine sells and everybody in retail knows it. Here is what polishing actually does to an old object. It removes metal. Not dirt, metal. Every pass takes a little of the surface away, and the first things to go are the highest points and the shallowest details, which is to say, the maker's mark, the fine engraving, and the crisp edges that told you it was made by hand in the first place. So this is the exact mirror of everything I told you earlier. The dark, dull, unloved piece in the back tray is the one nobody spent labor on, and therefore the one nobody subtracted from. You are looking for the piece that has been left alone. So how do you actually buy well in that room? Negotiate, because it is entirely expected. Pawn shops price with room in the number, and asking is part of the normal conversation there. Ask how long the piece has been in the case. Stock sitting in glass is money not working, and a piece that has been there since spring is a piece somebody would like gone. That one question tells you more about your negotiating room than anything else you can say. Then do the last step, the one everybody skips. Ask whether they will hold the piece for a day, or buy it and take it straight to a good, independent jeweler. Have them read the mark under a loupe while you watch. That visit costs almost nothing, and it is the whole difference between thinking you found something and knowing that you did. And an honest word about the shops, because I do not want you walking in with the wrong picture. A pawn shop is not a villain. It is a licensed, regulated business that keeps records and provides a genuinely useful service to people who need money quickly. The person behind that counter is pricing what they can measure. But know the risks. There is usually no warranty and no return. Condition is as it is, and every repair is yours. Nothing is guaranteed authentic unless the shop guarantees it in writing, and you will look at an enormous number of ordinary pieces to find one good one. Now, 2 things in the comments, because I read them. The first, go and get your own jewelry box down and tell me what is in there that a counter would price as scrap. The single earring you never threw away. The watch with the wide gold bracelet that stopped in 1970-something. The ring with the chipped stone. The bangle with a number on it instead of a carat mark. I would like to know what is sitting in American bedrooms tonight. And the second, where I will happily argue with you, the standard advice everybody repeats is buy the certified stone, always get the paperwork. And I think, for most people watching this, the certificate is quite often the most overpriced object in the entire case. Because at that point, you are not buying a stone. You are buying a document and paying a premium for the confidence it gives you, and then selling it on one day to somebody who discounts that same document to nothing. And if you take one thing away today, take this. The value in that glass case is not hiding. It is sitting there in ordinary light, on the back of things, in marks the size of a grain of rice, in a seam along a link, in the way a surface wears. Nobody is concealing it from you. It is simply that reading takes 20 minutes, and there is nobody in that building whose job it is to spend them. You are. That is the whole game. Go and put the kettle on, and I will see you at the next one.